Okay, guys, welcome back. This is going to be our second podcast for our ecology unit, and this one is specifically on community ecology. So remember what community was. It was talking about all of the different populations that live in the same ecosystem. So we're going to kind of talk about how they interact more.
All right, a community is a group of species living close enough together for potential interaction. Community ecology is the study of these interactions among all populations in a specific common environment.
Okay, so there's going to be a bunch of different relationships that these organisms can have living together. They're called interspecific interactions, okay? So the symbiotic interaction, symbiotic means just working together. They can be either, beneficial for both, harmful, or, some of each. So the first one is competition. And what these symbols are going to show you behind each term is if there's two organisms in the situation, it's going to show you if one is benefiting, one is being harmed, or in this case, if both can be harmed. So competition is when two organisms or two species cannot coexist in a community if their niches are identical. All right, this is when they compete for a limited resource. So this would be two different organisms living in an environment together and they both eat the exact same food, would be an example of competition. The next one, predation or parasitism, is when one is harmed and one is benefited. Okay, this is just the typical lion eating the gazelle. Okay, so this is just in any environment with predation, when one of the organisms is a predator and the other organism is the prey. And parasitism we talked a lot about before too. This is like, ticks, when the organism needs a host cell to do everything that other organisms do on their own. Mutualism, you can see here with the two positives, the two plus signs. This is when both organisms are benefited. An example of this would be lichens, which was that mutualistic relationship that we talked about during the plant unit between algae and fungus. They're both benefited. And then the last one here is called commensalism. And that's when one organism is benefited and the other one is not affected at all, not negatively or positively. So an example that they give of that would be barnacles that are attached to a whale. The barnacles are not bothering the whale, but they do have a place to live living on the whale.
Okay, and here's just some pictures. This first one's commensalism. Remember, that's this plant would be benefiting from having a place to live. The tree is not being harmed at all. Mutualism, both of these are being benefited. So this is the lichens. Predation, you can see this spider killing this butterfly. Competition, this is them fighting. Remember, same species fighting for the same food.
Okay, so let's look at them a little bit more in detail. In parasitism, one organism, being the parasite, is going to derive its nourishment from another organism, its host, which is harmed in the process of doing this.
Okay, mutualistic symbiosis or mutualism. This is an interspecific interaction that benefits both species. So both species are benefiting from this.
In commensalism, one species benefits while the other is not affected at all. These birds, you guys have probably even seen this on farms on your way to school, that there's these birds that live amongst the cattle and they actually kind of ride along on top of them. They are not harmed nor benefited by doing so, and then the birds kind of have somewhere to be.
Okay, here we are with competition. Remember, both species are going to be harmed by this because they're competing for the same resources. So this occurs when a species compete for a particular resource that is in short supply. Strong competition can lead to competitive exclusion, which means that the local elimination of one of the two competing species. So one would eventually die off due to lack of resources.
Okay, there's a principle, it's called the competitive exclusion principle, and it states that two species competing for the same limiting resources cannot coexist in the same place. They're talking about time, food, and space. And remember, when we're talking about limiting resources, we're talking about a resource that eventually will run out.
Okay, this is just a picture showing us niche. Remember, this is an organism's niche is its ecological role. So habitat is like an address. Niche would be more like its profession. Remember, competitive exclusion, no two similar species can occupy the same niche at the same time. So this is showing you two different types of species here that are living in the ocean. Fundamental niches mean that these could eat or take up the same resource at the same time. And eventually they're going to realize that it's going to work out better if one uses these resources at low tide and one uses the resources at high tide.
Okay, so as a result of competition, a species' fundamental niche may be different from its realized niche. That's what Coach Burnett was just talking about in that diagram. So basically, fundamental niche versus realized niche is fundamental would be the niche a species can occupy, that they're able to occupy, whereas the realized niche is the niche a species does, in fact, in reality, occupy day to day.
And this is just showing us resource partitioning. This is a reduced competition through microhabitats. So instead of living in the entire habitat, they're living in a smaller habitat within that same habitat.
All right, let's talk a little bit about predation. So predation drives evolution. How's that possible? How does that happen? Different predator adaptations are they locate and they subdue their prey, and then prey adaptations are they elude and they defend. These are all things that they learn to do in order to survive. So as far as locate and subduing prey, locating, obviously they need to find them. Subdue them basically means they need to have control over them. And then prey adaptations, elude and defend. Elude is basically staying away from the predator. Defending, obviously, once they are in contact with the predator, defending themselves accordingly. So they're just showing some examples down here. We've got horns, speed, coloration, spines, thorns, toxins as far as plants go, some of the defense mechanisms that they have as well.
All right, feeding adaptations for predators include claws, teeth, fangs, stingers, and poison. Animals also display a great variety of defensive adaptations, and we're going to go in these more in detail here shortly. But coloration, mimicry, and distraction. Some plant defenses would include physical deterrents such as spines, thorns, other things like that, like we talked about toxins before, and then secondary chemical compounds.
Okay, so here's an example of a coloration defense. It's called cryptic coloration, and it's like camouflage. So down here we've got a whippoorwill, which is a bird, and you'll notice how well it blends in with its environment. And over here is a lizard. I'll outline it here with the pointer. That's the lizard right there. You can barely see that it blends in so well with its environment.
Okay, and this is just, again, here's a toad. You can see his eyes are here, so it blends in very well. Here's another lizard, and here's a frog. So you can see how camouflaged they are.
Okay, and then there's another type of coloration that animals use. It's called aposematic coloration, which is basically like a bright warning color to predators. So examples of those are, monarch butterflies. That's right here. Larvae. See how colorful this caterpillar is. These frogs, this is the coloration is part of their defense as well for animals to stay away.
All right, in some cases, one prey species that may gain a significant protection by mimicking the appearance of another. So that means they are looking like something else that they're not.
So this is called Batesian mimicry, and it's when a palatable or harmless species mimics a harmful model. Palatable means something that can be eaten. It has to do with your palate, how it tastes, and harmless, obviously. And so what they want to do is they want to mimic a poisonous or a harmful model so that other organisms stay away from them. Okay, so here's an example down here. It says, a hawk moth larva puffs up to look like a poisonous snake. Okay, so here's the larva right here. And it puffs up its face because it wants to look like this poisonous snake right here so that other organisms stay away from it.
All right, here's another example of Batesian mimicry. Now this does develop from convergent evolution, meaning they came from separate ancestors, but did converge to where they do look alike. This is a monarch male butterfly. Now, these are poisonous. This is a viceroy male, and it's edible, so different birds and things do eat these. They try to stay away from the monarch because it is poisonous, and it's identified by its little spot. And the viceroy, you could see, has a line instead of a spot.
Okay, so here's another example. It says the coral snake is poisonous, the king snake is not. So what kind of mimicry would this be? This would be Batesian mimicry. They look very similar, but one is very poisonous and the other one is not.
Alright guys, we're going to quickly discuss community structure. If you remove a species from a community, it will change the entire community structure. So there are dominant species, which is the most abundant species or highest biomass in the community. So a lot of times, for example, in the rainforest, certain plants would have this greatest biomass. Now sometimes it may be different types of organisms, but it's the one that has the total weight in the community. Keystone species, these exert an important regulating effect on other species in the community, and we'll go into keystone a little bit more in depth.
So keystone species are not necessarily abundant in a community, but they exert strong control in a community by their ecological roles or niches. So what this basically should mean to you is it's not going to be the organism in the community with the most numbers, but it is for whatever reason going to exert the most force. It could be a strong predator, it could be a strong competitor, either of those things, but it's going to really exert its presence in some way or another. Those are called keystone species. Okay guys, that's going to be the wrap up for this second podcast in the ecology unit, and we'll see you in class.